There we go. All right. April 16th. Have at it, Ryan.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. So we have been recognizing that we do not have a land acknowledgement yet for this meeting group, and that we meet from a variety of spaces, but that we want to at least acknowledge that we do not have an acknowledgement, and perhaps pose the question of what would be an appropriate acknowledgement for the work that this group is doing, and how would we go about formally acknowledging. And so, in attendance, I'd like to thank Tracy, Sarah, Nita, Kai for joining up. Kai, I'm excited that you get to switch roles today a little bit. I see you're still taking some minutes, but being able to switch from the facilitator to the participant is a really nice shift, and I really enjoy that when I get to do that in my other meetings. So we've been asking about signals that we have been seeing. And I'd like to, I had another question that has been coming into my head thanks to an article that has been shared with me, that you have to properly define the question. And a lot of times defining the question that we are trying to ask with groups involves putting some constraints on that question. And so, thinking through the lens of AKV3, we've asked, we put the constraint of time. What do we want Alaska to look like 3 years from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now? And I'm wondering, what other constraints do we have? What are the things, like if we were to name one thing that we think we have to see in that vision of the future, what would that one thing be for us? I asked that question and I don't have an answer readily prepared for it yet. So I'm curious if any things come to mind for y'all.
The question was one thing that we feel like we should be prepared for.
Yeah, thanks for seeking clarification there. I'm thinking, what is a necessary thing that we have to see in our vision of the future? What's the one thing that we really are not willing to bend on? Something that we think is necessary. Yeah.
Healthy, thriving ecosystems.
Yeah, I want to say something about the opportunity mindset that Kai has been speaking on for a few weeks now. Seeing Alaska as a place that is worth investing in and has opportunities. So that probably plays into Nita's answer as well.
I think it's a really fascinating question, Ryan. The thing that I'm drawn to at the moment as a constraint is something, I guess I've got two percolating, but one is that a constraint of this AKV3 is something that holds up, protects, and finds the value in the Arctic. I think that's a unique part of the place that we're in, and we need to figure out how we protect that and live it and grow from it. The other thing that I'm drawn to is that I think whatever we do has to find a way to lift up the indigenous Alaska Native peoples into whatever whatever the future Alaska is. I don't know what that means exactly, but it needs to be different than the kind of a minority role that's seeking for recognition and standing, it seems like some days. And so yeah, that's all I got for the moment, but I think it's a fascinating question to try and explore.
Thank you, Kai. I think that I am not sure how to phrase it, but I think that we need a regenerative economy. I think that we've been so focused on extraction and consumption that we really need to be thinking about how we are giving back and the impacts of our actions. Well, Tracy, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I would like to hold some space for you if you do have any thoughts on what that a necessary constraint or requirement would be for AKV3. Oh, and we lost Tracy. Okay.
I guess one of the things that like within that context, right? I know you asked for one thing, but the kind of tagline I've been using for a decade is a world that can support life and a culture worth living for. Right. So it has to have that dual aspect. Because if we do have this beautiful utopian world, but we don't have free will and we don't have rights, then like then is it worth doing? And it is worth doing, but the reason I pose it that way is because there's some people who don't view humans as able to pivot and transition, where we need to believe that humans can pivot and transition to doing the right things and being real humans again.
Yeah, those are great constraints. I would be very concerned if humans were not a part of the consideration for what this world in the future looks like. I've had a few other conversations on how we help keep humans relevant in our future world. And yeah, it's interesting to me that we have to consider that or question that at all. Well, Tracy, thanks for joining us again. We are posing the question of what would be a necessary constraint or something that we think that has to be present in our vision of the future as we look to the next 3, 10, or 30 years. And so if you have a thought on that, I'd love to hear.
Thank you. I appreciate that and apologize for the drop off. I was in safe driving mode and pulled into a parking lot, and then it wouldn't let me back into the system. So I don't at the moment, mostly because I feel like I was not here for the last 2 meetings, and so I'm catching my mind up. But at the moment, nothing is coming to mind that hasn't already been raised. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Welcome back. We're glad to have you.
Thanks.
Well, I think that, we're glad to have you here because part of what is so important about this group is just the connections that we all make with each other. And we have this is a, meaningful space for us to engage with each other, but trying to continue these conversations and share and connect with more folks into the future is part of the magic of what this group is all about. So I'm wondering if we have any discussion points that we're hoping to cover. Any exciting news or updates that folks have to share with the group? Just want to open that up a little bit.
Nothing crazy exciting, but something I've been picking up on recently, and I think I've mentioned it probably in every meeting in the past month or so, is food scarcity is such a point we're focusing on as Alaskans in general, and maybe this is confirmation bias, but I'm seeing it everywhere. So Food for Thought Alaska is doing and launching that free food fridge, was sponsored by a couple of local businesses. Kai shared a link recently. Megan Militello, owner of Elevated Oats, is creating a Facebook group for Alaskan food manufacturers. And then I'm, of course, seeing what you're doing over at Seeds of Change, Ryan, and now meeting Mita as well. It just seems like food scarcity is on the mind. And there's also a friend that I have over at Tenina Folk Farm who's helping residents of the valley, I think, who have land, apply for micro grants to help address food scarcity in, more, the valley is not super rural, but more rural than urban cities.
Yeah, can I speak to that a little bit, Ryan? May I have the floor?
Take it.
Take it. So Sarah, just for context, Alaska, we ship in 95% of our goods and food into the state, and we only have 3 to 5 days within the grocery stores of food availability. And we have been beating that drum for a long time, trying to awaken people. I've been, kind of citing those measures for 10 years now, trying to get people to wake up that Alaska's independence from everywhere else is actually just hubris at this point. We're highly dependent on this feed line, and more so than other places. So we have an awareness now because of the scarcity that we experienced with the pandemic and having the ships, and the trade routes slow a bit due to the pandemic, and people freaking out that we might not get our ships into port twice a week. They come in on Sundays and on Tuesdays, and that literally is the main source for our entire state, and they come in through the Port of Anchorage. We saw that about 5 years ago when we had one of our ships that broke down and was late, and we ran out of, things like almond milk and different things in the store. And that was a kind of a micro wake up call for people. And for context, in the 50s, the Matsu Valley used to be predominantly farmland, and we grew 50% of our food in state. So either wild harvested, subsistence, or grew 50% of our food. So we have the land and capacity to grow our food, but we have to look at it differently. Like Anchorage, it would take 3,000 1-acre farms to supply the green plant nutrients that we need for the city the size of Anchorage, but it's half of the state's population. So you would say, okay, so a total for our state, we need about 6,000 growing acres, right? So the more independent spaces that we can have growing that work collaboratively together, the better. But we have some major issues that we have to address. Like we need meat processing plants that are approved by the USDA. We don't have enough meat processing plants to support our growers in state. We need to change our food laws on milk and milk distribution, right? Because our dairies keep shutting down because our policies don't support them. So I'll stop now, but that's just kind of like that overarching. Is this an issue that's just coming up? Yes. And it's an issue that's a big one that should be like the Grim Reaper following us around that we should be aware of.
I'm curious on that, and either, any of you, but, Sarah, Mita, we've seen the original farming as largely a government instituted program going back into the 30s. And then over time, we've had a state-run meat processing plant, and we had the state subsidizing getting the dairy programs going. And it seems like in times of scarcity, because of the reliance on public funding to keep those programs going, they start getting cut in terms of dairy inspectors and meat inspectors. And I'm just wondering how you view the path to potentially some sort of sustainable food model that moves past the legacy that required so much government support to initiate it, or maybe we're supposed to realize that this is something that we need as a public investment to keep it going. Do you have a thought on kind of that legacy, and what does the future look like? Does it mean a renewal of understanding that we should publicly invest in it, or is there a different path of making it privately economically viable?
Are you asking me directly?
Either of you or anybody. That's just kind of my. I'm very interested in this food security issue, but this issue keeps kind of surfacing in my mind about how do we actually do it at a time when we keep cutting all of our public support, and do we need to reverse that course, or do we need to figure out something that's wrong with the private ability for it to work? I don't know which is the right path, or maybe both. I don't know.
Right. So I'll draw a couple of things and then turn it over to the group. So one of the issues is this concept that it's not, sustainable because of the cost. And part of that is we have an illusion that we've built up in our structures, right? So we have subsidized foods like wheat, milk, soy, and dairies. These are all subsidized monocropping cultures that would not be sustainable without these government funds. And so what it's doing is it's driving the cost of food down so low that our local growers can't compete on the same level. We also have subsidies of oil and gas development, which is it's keeping the cost of shipping lower than it should be in itself, right? So the cost of producing it somewhere else is being subsidized. The cost of shipping and all of our glut in the oil and gas industry is being subsidized. So if we were doing actual real dollar to dollar exchanges, it would be more affordable and more accessible here in the state. It would require some initial investment because we can't expect small farmers to have, readily accessing millions of dollars to get started up, right? But if we were comparing apples to apples, it would be more sustainable and more cost effective.
Fascinating, thanks.
I'd like to speak to the difference in structures in farming in Alaska versus farming in the lower 48. Mita touched on monoculture farming in the lower 48, which is the predominant method. You have these huge monolith farms that are tens of thousands of acres, or tens of hundreds of acres rather. And the challenge that we run into is that the food safety law that is constructed is accessible or is possible to meet much more easily for those large farms. But industrial agriculture requires you to have specific facilities and specific infrastructure in place that's very expensive and drives that consolidation of production. And it's much harder to meet the regulatory requirements as a smaller farmer. When we look at the farms in Alaska, most of them are smaller farms. They're smallholder farmers that are independent and don't have the access to capital or really the bandwidth to use a large the large facilities that would be necessary, the expensive facilities. You could make them, but they would be very cost intensive. And so we have kind of like this challenge up here where we have to do a balancing act between having these safe food standards, but then we also need to balance that with what's reasonable for what the capacity of the producers are, the needs of the state, kind of try and balance that out. And we see a similar challenge in agriculture, in the dairy industry, in mariculture. If you want to get started doing mariculture and doing seaweed farming, you need to be doing genetic testing of the crop that you're going to be planting to make sure that it is similar to the crop that is native to the area. But where are all these genetic testing sites? And if you need to take 50 genetic samples, then you're going to have to, as a farmer, you're going to have to pay for 50 tests. And what is that sort of cost going to incur? And how is that going to prevent you? It's just going to put some barriers in place to even get started. And so that's where there is potentially some need to have upfront infrastructure investment. A similar infrastructure investment comes in like the meat processing facilities or in cold chain management for shipping, because it's very challenging to get product from Anchorage to the North Slope because it freezes on runways. And it's also very challenging if you want to get it from the North Slope down to Anchorage if we ever get some production coming the other direction as well. So
We need airships.
yeah.
I think an additional issue that I have touched base on with especially my friend who runs that farm in the Matsu Valley, who teaches a lot of husbandry and agricultural techniques, is there's simply a lack of interest in younger generations to do the work. So how can we incentivize people who would be coming into these small farms generationally to do the work, to be interested in the success of our food scarcity issues or just our state in general. When you're grown, in a place that I'm grown, where like food scarcity, that doesn't exist. Like what? Food can't just like always be on my plate, always be in grocery stores. That doesn't make sense. What? So,
Well,
go ahead.
as I say, that's a twofold thing. One of it is we have to create a culture of growing. So instituting growing activities in our schools at a young age, which also it creates the people's understanding and ability to do hard labor. So that's one of the issues that we have, is a lot of people don't know how to labor anymore and don't actually understand the psychological, spiritual, emotional, and physical benefits of hard labor. And we don't teach that in schools. And so when you're planting, you have that labor, but then you also have that outcome of gratification of plants and food. And so we have to start instilling that within our education in kindergarten and preschool, and having summer programs where children can go and labor in a good way, right? Not in an abusive way, but in a good way, and be able to give that food to friends and family and share that food and have that joy of providing for the family. And that's how we're going to get it. Because if we take a bunch of people who've never labored and don't know the ability of a delayed gratification and throw them into farming systems, it's torturous for them.
I have a friend of mine who jokingly says that the problem with our kids these days is that we're not putting them to work and that we need more child labor. And he says that jokingly, but what he's really getting at is that we have all these young folks that have free time on their hands and really could be getting engaged, particularly with like agriculture contributing to their community, because there's something really satisfying about starting from seed and taking it all the way to harvest, and then being able to share that food that you've grown with your community. You're directly contributing, and you can see how you fit within your own.
Ryan, I don't know if you saw Andrea and Laura have joined us.
Welcome, Andrea. You're
Hi.
jumping. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying hi. I'm coming to you guys from a hospital in Phoenix, so I'm just gonna kind of sit here and watch what's left.
Well, I hope you're all right, and I'm glad you're able to join today.
I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm here with a friend who's supporting a friend.
Important work. Well, we have been. You're on mute there. It's officially a Zoom meeting. So we have been diving into some food scarcity concerns, just as a general topic that's come up today. If y'all are up for it, I want to hold space for any closing thoughts, and then start to explore some of our program updates. I know that we've got some exciting things going on with the writing program. We've got some follow-up with the JEDC Summit, and we're exploring some APU student workshops that are coming up.
I have one question on the food scarcity issue. There was a little slate of food scarcity projects that sort of bubbled up in the ecosystem, maybe in, starting around 2015 until 2018 or 19. And I just wondered, not so much did anything come of those projects, but if anything was spawned out of them, to understand whether some of those projects had more legs. And I'm really actually thinking about the vertical harvest. I'm not thinking of the term. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Vertical harvest hydroponics?
Yeah, and there was several of them.
Yeah. Well, I can speak broadly, but specifically with vertical harvest, they have got their Connex size growing unit, and they've also got some of their smaller units. And to my understanding, they're still producing and distributing their units to communities in the US and in Canada. And so they're still around.
I guess I was asking kind of a larger question of like, does that represent one of the potential solutions for the food insecurity, or is that too micro to address the problem that we're talking about this morning?
I think that it's an indicator of shifts that are happening in production. And so when we have looked at some of like the large monoculture cropping, and large farms. You know, I think that smaller growing units and smaller activities like that are very meaningful, and that it's creating some more opportunities for folks to be able to produce food in their own communities that may have not traditionally been an agricultural area, or may have perceived that they didn't have the opportunity to produce in that way. There's some really cool stuff that's going on with those growing units where folks are taking and stacking multiple of them and then having a central processing area. And so that production technique or that style of production is able to scale. And I personally, I'm a big fan of having localized production and having decentralized production, because then if you have hangups in your supply chain, if you have challenges in your production, the nice thing about a Connex is that if one of those units goes down, but you have 5 of them, you still have a fourth of your production, or you still have, 4/5 rather. And so I think that there's a lot of positive things that can come out of that style of growing. The other really nice thing is instead of shipping out a bunch of lettuce or produce to a community, which is essentially crunchy water, you're shipping out nutrients and seeds and the inputs, and then you're producing on site. And so you get a lot more bang for your buck for the carbon that's being generated through the shipping. So I think that's really positive. And then, throughout the state, there's several different like needs assessments and research that's being done right now that's grant funded. I think I know of like 4 or 5 different projects that are going on all at the same time. And so there's a general need that is being met for a lot of the USDA grant funding that happens. There's usually like a planning project phase that's available for the grants, and then there's an implementation phase to the grant. And so what I'm expecting to see is that right now we're in the planning phase for a lot of different community projects that's exploring what's possible. And then in the coming years, we'll begin to see some more of the implementation phase of the grant funding start to roll out as they start to act on what they've learned through the first round of funding. And then if we look up north, I'm trying to think of the Calypso Farms. So Calypso Farms recently just got a big grant to do some more training for folks, and so there is some motion that's happening in that area as well. My general sense is at this point we have a better sense of growing techniques through controlled environment agriculture, but what's missing for traditional and controlled environment agriculture is the human capital and the knowledge of how to actually run those farms. And so I think that we're going to start to see more folks step out and step up to train people and to pass on that knowledge.
Ryan, just to ask you, and I'm just looking for a brief answer right now, but I'm really curious. Part of what I heard in Laura's question was that there was, during that period she's referring, 2015-18, there's just a big visible explosion of food related startups and discussions. It's vertical harvest hydroponics got started, Alaska Natural Organics got started, I think Seeds of Change got started, the Alaska Food Policy Council thing got started. There's just this big explosion of awareness of this opportunity, and it seems that it's kind of gotten quiet. And part of what I heard in Laura's question was that just a big flash in the pan and now we're kind of back to normal? Or is that actually a thing that has gained momentum, is growing, but now it's becoming more established and we're just not seeing it, but it's actually happening? And what I think I heard you say is that in fact, we have continued growing from that original explosion. It's just not visible right now to folks that aren't necessarily in the broad ecosystem, but folks that are in the food related issue area. There is a lot going on. Is that how you'd summarize it, or was it a flash in the pan and it needs a kick in the butt now to keep it going again?
Thank you. I think that's an excellent summary. Sorry for the long-winded response that you got there, maybe more than what you had originally bargained for. I think that it is still going on. I think it's quieter. And I think that it absolutely could use a kick in the butt, but that's because I think that we're a ways behind and have lots of catch up to do. There's still some great stuff happening. for example, I went to Double Shovel Cider the other day with a couple of friends, and while I was at Double Shovel Cider, I noticed that in the corner of the parking lot there were 2 Connex containers that have a big green F painted on the side of them. And I had to double check the logo to make sure that it matched, but they've got 2 Freight Farm growing Connexes that are sitting in their parking lot that they're starting to bring online. And so there's lots of little pockets of activity that are happening. Word is that they're going to start growing arugula. And so, as people start to find niches in the market, as people start to find interest, there's just lots of action and traction that's happening. But it's a slow burn, sustained sort of effort that is a little quieter. I think maybe in a couple different areas in the startup ecosystem, we kind of saw like this big bubble and explosion of interests, and then it sort of pulled back a little bit. But I think it's still there. The initial that heat's still there. The motion is still there.
It sounds like just it sounds like it'd be a valuable thing for maybe as part of AKV3 down the road to figure out how to bring visibility to it, because if it's really an essential issue for the future of Alaska, it needs to be a visible activity area and one that's engaging, as opposed to something that's out of sight, out of mind for maybe more people. Obviously, some of you are deep in it, but some of the rest of us, Laura's question was a to me that kind of resonated.
Yeah, absolutely. Forgive me for holding so much of the floor time, but this is just reminding me of a comment that Eric Wyatt, who's a oyster seed farmer, that he made, which was that people, young adults in particular, don't know about the jobs and the careers that are available to them unless we're showing them those opportunities, unless we're making an intentional effort to connect with them and to help them understand what potential is there. And so, this is, Laura, what I'm hearing in your question is like, hey, is this actually happening? Is this really there? And Mita, I'm hearing a similar thing when we're talking about encouraging young folks to labor. It's like, well, this still happens and it's still important. And so it's a good reminder to me to try and lead by example. Well, I know we've got some exciting program updates with the writing competition. Sarah or Kai, would you be up for telling us what's going on in that area?
Yeah, I can briefly update on the development side for the website. So I did write the website copy for the web page, delivered that to Pasquale. Not sure where that's at now, so we'll have to follow up with Pasquale. But I also created a quick spreadsheet to help us track potential judges and then our participants as they come in. Obviously, participants won't be coming in for a while, but I mostly made it for myself because I had a couple of ideas of who to reach out to. And so I've reached out to a few people who have said they're interested in potentially judging. And I wanted to pose the question to the group of what we would like to do with that interest. Would we like them to come in on a call and kind of meet the group? Would we like to just kind of give them the rundown personally and just, have them be on standby and ready to read the submissions as they come in, which won't be for about of course, another month. What do you guys see as probably the best steps forward to take that interest in judging the writing contest?
I think, if they want to come join, structuring what it would be for them to do that would, I think, be important, just because I think the organic nature of the conversation here, which is very valuable, I'm not sure helps us stay in the direction that I understand we're supposed to be going. So, if they wanted to come in, we certainly could do that structured. I think for me, the more important thing is getting them all together at some point before the judging would occur, and having whatever the common understanding is, or some sort of a rubric or a checklist or something or other that creates at least a minimum base objectivity, and then recognizing that, each judge is going to bring his or her lens to things, and looking at poetry is going to be different than a short story. And so, I think to me, those are things that would help whoever it is raise his or her hand to do the judging.
That brings up a good point of the rubric and making them specific to the type of submission as well. In the participants spreadsheet, I did make a column for like rating out of 10. That was more just an idea, not based in any like rubric I had predetermined. But I think that like maybe assigning a number value would make it easier to see who the winner was, because of course like art is so subjective, so I don't have much experience in this regard, but how would we judge and how would we create a simple to understand, winner?
I think that you create something that, identifies what are the thematic things we would want to see, and does the writer demonstrate that whatever mode he or she uses, and then maybe a somewhat subjective artistic contribution, and a quality of presentation. And there's it really depends on how far down in the weeds that we want to get and how objective we think we need to be. But I think we could come up with the 3 or 4 primary character qualities that we want to see in all of them, which obviously the big one is, are they articulating something that aligns with the vision of this particular group's desire to identify what Alaska might be version 3, and then the other pieces. So I mean, I think it's we could get together with a small subgroup off of this meeting, create a general framework to bring back to this group to get thumbs up or thumbs down and some tweaking on it. And I would recommend a scale a little bit bigger than 1 to 10, only because it doesn't allow you a lot of variability.
Sarah, the other thing I was going to suggest, I've put a note down here I can follow up with it, is I'd be curious to go out to the annual Anchorage Daily News's and UAA's creative writing contest and just find out what is their process. They've done it for 20 or 30 years at this point. My guess is that they've kind of figured out how to organize the effort in terms of the rubrics, the process of multiple review, the whole 9 yards. So I'll reach out to them and see if they can give us share their process. But I do think having some sort of judges meeting at some point sooner or later would be good, because it would also, I think, be valuable if they could get together and we could work on this to then share that back out on the website, so that people that are working on submissions have a little more clarity about how the judges will be evaluating pieces. I've put out there some very broad thoughts I had on a rubric, but I recognize that it was very incomplete, and it might be helpful for the participants to be encouraged by seeing more clarity on that.
Yep, and I also created a section for the web page to have that be very clear on what they're being judged on. Yep, I love that idea of reaching out to ADN or UAA. Just getting some more experienced folks to just let us know how they do it, I think is super valuable. And then that way we can bring clarity to the judges as well about exactly what their role is.
I'm hearing that it could be helpful to have a breakout group or a side discussion about what are the specific questions or areas that we want to engage in or that we want to grade on. And I think that could be combined really well with that ADN process. Is there anyone in the group today who would be interested in joining a breakout panel or a breakout discussion?
Like right now or in another time?
I think at another time, but just seeking interest at this time.
Yeah, I'd be down to talk about it, of course, because I also have interest in judging. So.
Okay.
And if you need a hand, I'm happy to help. Also, fine if you don't.
I'm not the optimum person to be a judge. I can help clarify like what we should be looking for, but I'm a slow reader and I have a huge reading list. And so I would be the worst person to be a judge for you guys.
Yeah, I think I would be a terrible judge as well.
I think, Ryan, one of the things that strikes me is that it would probably behoove us to clarify if there's somebody that's kind of the point person on the writing program, to kind of take on keeping track of this stuff. So far, I've just kind of nudged it along through a group process, and I'm usually slow or reluctant to go out and ask somebody to take stuff on, just because I try to do it all myself. And I'm happy to keep shepherding this along. It's obviously something I was interested in, but it might be helpful if there was somebody that wanted to say, hey, I'll be the ringleader for this writing program, to kind of help centralize who's doing what and when and whatnot, as opposed to a cat herding project, which we've got lots of great cats offering to help out. So that's not a problem, but it is what it is right now.
Yeah, I think that is a great question. Anytime that we can have a point person at Seeds of Change for a project, I find that that project is much more successful than when we try to do it via panel. All right, well, maybe we'll see if anyone's interested in signing up for that. I'm very hesitant to volunteer anyone.
That's the way I am.
Well, I'm seeing we got, go ahead, Guy.
I was just going to say, Laura was popping in there with a question also. I didn't know if you saw that.
Well, the question doesn't relate to this topic, so maybe it goes right at the end. I mean, I'll just put it out there because it doesn't require an answer. I would like for everybody in this group, or anybody who wants to email me maybe 1 to 3 names of founders that I should be contacting to invite to this founder group. I'm just kind of building an initial list right now, and I thought, you know, this group represents probably a lot of founders that I don't know. So if we can build a small initial list, that's kind of the starting point for me. That's it.
Is it just for any founders, or is there a specific purpose for the group?
Well, I think if we can get a little initial group going, then we can make some group decisions about what we want this to be. I think, you know, I think what the idea is to have founders have a go-to place where we can discuss founder obstacles. And it's probably going to be a once a month meeting, more than likely. And so we'll try to pick topics that are sort of generally interesting. And if we end up having if the group needs to break into more than one group, that might make sense too. If there's sort of one group leaning towards tech and one towards e-commerce, I'm making this up. But I think the group will probably, part of what we need to build in is a kind of an organic growth mechanism in case we need to have more focus on certain topics. But right now, I think we just need to start with something. And so it would be, I think it should be a founder, or, you know, yeah, I don't really have a lot of restrictions right now.
That's good.
Yeah, I could see it at some point. Maybe there's a resource section on a website, you know, as we start to find good resources and good things that founders are finding to be particularly helpful, and finding ways to share those resources. Yeah, thank you, Laura. All right, well, we've got the JEDC Summit was last week. I know we had a couple folks that were at the summit. And so I'm just curious if anyone has any summit follow-up, any big takeaways from that summit meeting.
No, went there. I love the focus on the local economy and all the strategies that came out of that discussion, especially that Michael Schubert or Schubert, whatever his name is. He's got some great ideas on all of that. But I would say that in terms of, you know, the discussions that we had, Sarah and I did one on that kind of touched on AKV3. I did another one on something, the Alaska Innovation Coalition. You know, there's so much being covered and it moved so fast. There wasn't a lot of opportunity to really do some network and community building. So it's really hard for me to know whether or not we were just noise in the wind, or whether we've actually, you know, accomplished something in terms of making a dent in anyone's perceptions of the future. I'm at a loss lot. Sarah, did you come away with any perception on that?
I got introduced to a lot of interesting ideas, and that's pretty much the extent of what really came out of that for me. Mind you, I was only at one short, so I only got to see 3 of the presentations, one being one that I presented in. So I wasn't at the full summit as well.
Yeah, I was at the summit, and well, I wasn't at the summit actually. I got a ticket with the intent to attend some of the summit sections, and only ended up making it to the panel area where I had a presentation. And so, I think that I'm looking for other ways to kind of reconnect or re-engage. And I learned about the financing that's available for renewable energy through the municipality, and the importance of local and supporting local businesses, but no big, huge light bulbs or takeaways for me.
I put the link in the chat to Michael Schumann's website, and I would encourage anyone who's thinking about local and the value of local and the investability of local to check out his resources. And when the JEDC content is available streaming, I'd really recommend watching his stuff. It's really inspiring, and I think it lifts up the value. But it also, to really the point, Mita, that you made, it really shows the power of understanding kind of the mixed up priorities and subsidies that are kind of screwing up local. And I really appreciate your comments back to me about this question of how do we make local work, and realizing that we've kind of baked it out of what works. And that was part of what Michael was getting at, was that the local is much more investable and profitable, and a smarter investment when you start stripping away the way we build up protections around other larger industries that push local out of the way.
Well, I'm seeing that we're going to have several people who are going to have to hop off at 11. And so I'd just like to say thank you for everyone for being here today, for engaging in this conversation, and how much I appreciate getting to talk with you all. Any last thoughts for the good of the order?
I'll follow up with folks on the APU workshop. That's next Thursday at 5:30.
Yep.
So we'd appreciate input and support on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to share with you guys on that Wednesday, my entrepreneurship class, we talked about ecosystem building. And so I'm strongly encouraging everybody to show up for that, because they really got into the conversation. Aaron was our guest speaker, Aaron Baca, and it was a tremendous 2-hour discussion about ecosystem building, and some of the ideas that, I think it was the first time that some of these students actually, I think almost all of them, it was the first time that they had been introduced to that concept and some of that terminology. And they were like pinging all over the place with ideas about, of course, a lot of them are indigenous, and they're like, why do we not have, we have, our corporations have funds for startups, but we don't have any of these resources in this ecosystem. So they're really excited about how to kind of learn more about that, tie into that, and bring that back to their corporations. And so it's like, that's awesome. I can't wait to have that for that on Thursday at 5:30, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll be reminding them again on Wednesday about it.
Sure, and it should be on the APU calendar now. If you want to link students to that, there's a registration link on there.
Yeah, I got an email and I forwarded that to them. I'm going to do it again because they have a tendency to, like, out of sight, out of mind. And end of the semester and all of that. But we're going to have another great discussion on Wednesday. So I think they'll be pumped and ready to come to that on Thursday. So
excellent.
This has been a really great entrepreneurship class. I've really enjoyed teaching it, and it's it's got me really excited about what's going on in the future of people who are interested in investing in Alaska. So I can't wait.
Mhm. Sounds great. Okay, good.
Yeah, that's really exciting to hear. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording.